Snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, the kind that seemed to take their time deciding where to land. The mountains around Sagebrush Ridge lay draped in white, their jagged shoulders softened by winter's patient hand. Smoke curled from the lone chimney on the ridge, thin as a whisper, disappearing into the pale sky. Elias Crowther moved through the corral with the steady rhythm of a man who had long since learned to pace himself against the cold. His coat was worn smooth at the elbows, his boots patched more than once. 30 winters had passed since he first came here alone, and in all that time the silence had become less a companion than a mirror, reflecting everything he had lost and everything he had refused to let in. The wind had a voice if you listened hard enough, and Elias often did. It carried the creak of trees, the groan of ice shifting on the river, sometimes even the faint echo of memory. He had learned to read the weather in that wind, to sense storms before the clouds rolled in. But this evening it carried something stranger, soft, uneven thuds that didn't belong to nature. He paused mid-step, his breath clouding before him, and tilted his head. The sound came again, faint but distinct, from the direction of the barn. He crossed the yard with the caution of a man who had seen trouble wear many faces. Pushing the barn door open, he was met not with the glare of an intruder but the dim outline of figures, 10 of them, huddled together in the gloom. Snow clung to their shawls and hair, melting in slow rivulets down cheeks too cold to flush. Their eyes, dark and watchful, turned toward him in unison. One stepped forward. She was not tall, but there was a steadiness in her stance, the kind born from carrying burdens longer than her years. "We have nowhere else," she said, her voice low and even. The English was careful, deliberate, the kind spoken by someone who had learned it to survive. Elias's gaze swept over the group. Most were young, one no more than a girl, all wrapped in blankets so thin they were more symbol than shield. He felt the weight of the moment press in, the old instinct to keep his world small pushing against the sight of their need. In town, people whispered enough about him without him taking in a company of exiled Apache women. He knew that before the snow melted, there would be talk, ugly, heavy talk. "Barn loft's warmer than the open," he said finally, his voice a slow grind from disuse. "There's wood stacked by the wall. You'll need to see to your own fire." A flicker passed through the woman's eyes, something between relief and guardedness, before she nodded. She turned without ceremony, and began guiding the others toward the loft ladder. Elias stood for a long moment, watching as they settled into the shadows above, before closing the door against the wind. The next morning, he saddled his bay gelding and rode the hour into town. The streets were thinly tracked with wagon ruts, the store windows fogged with frost. He stopped at Miriam Pike's general store for flour, salt, and coffee. Miriam had known him since before the ridge had taken root in his bones. She eyed the extra flour sack he placed on the counter. "Expecting company?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. "Hungry mouths find their way to a warm roof," he said, keeping his tone neutral. Her brows lifted, and for a moment she seemed about to press further. Instead, she shook her head and began wrapping the parcels. "You know how folks get about anything they don't understand. Best keep that in mind, Elias." He left without promising her anything. Outside, Sheriff Amos Rourke leaned against the hitching post, chewing on a toothpick. "Heard you've got some visitors up your way," the sheriff said, his eyes narrowing slightly against the glare of snow. "Winter brings all sorts," Elias replied. The sheriff spat into the snow. "Just saying, might be easier for everyone if they moved along. Apache women, out here on their own, that's the kind of thing that stirs folks up." Elias mounted without answering, the conversation leaving a sour weight in his gut. By the time he reached the ridge, the light was slipping fast from the sky. In the barn, the smell of wood smoke lingered faintly, mingling with something softer, sage or cedar, he couldn't tell. One of the women, a narrow-faced soul with quick hands, was mending a piece of harness leather. Another was splitting kindling in the corner, her movements efficient without waste. Later, while he checked the mare in the back stall, he felt a presence beside him. It was the one who had spoken at the door. She crouched by the mare's leg, inspecting the joint where the animal favored her weight. Without asking, she began to rub it with a salve that smelled of pine and resin. "Name's Naeli," she said quietly, not looking up. Elias nodded once. Elias. She did not offer more, and he did not press. The mare stood easier under her touch, and Elias, though he did not say it, found his own shoulders loosening. That night, as he banked the fire in his cabin, he heard from the barn loft a low thread of singing. It was a melody strange to his ear, yet it tugged at some long quiet place inside him, pulling up the image of his daughter's small hands, long gone from this earth. He sat a long while, listening until the cold drove him to bed. Days folded into each other. The women kept mostly to themselves, but he saw their work in the stacked woodpile, the swept barn floor, the orderly rows of tools returned to their places. Naeli spoke little, but her eyes met his without flinching, and in those exchanges something unspoken began to root itself, a recognition of endurance. It was during one of his rare trips up the ridge trail for hunting that Elias caught sight of movement far below. A knot of riders was making its way toward his land, their horses breaking the crusted snow in dark lines. Even at a distance, the posture of their bodies told him what their purpose would be. He stayed on the ridge longer than necessary, letting the cold sharpen his thoughts, before making his way back down. When he returned, the women were outside, working against the low sun. Naeli was repairing a section of fence, her hair pulled back against the wind, the others moving with quiet purpose beside her. They did not see him watching from the rise above, but he saw them, and knew that whatever those riders had in mind, the piece here was balanced on a thread thin enough to snap at the first harsh word. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant hoofbeats up the slope. Elias stood still, listening, the snow settling around his boots like the closing of a book not yet finished. The hoofbeats reached the yard before the riders appeared, their shapes rising from the whiteness like dark stones breaking through ice. Elias stood in the open, coat drawn tight, watching as 4 men reined up just short of the fence. Their horses blew steam into the cold air, stamping against the frost. The leader, a broad-shouldered ranch hand Elias recognized from town, fixed him with a narrowed stare. "Crowther," the man called, "we're looking for some Apache women. Heard they've taken shelter here." Elias said nothing at first, letting the quiet stretch. Naeli had stepped from the barn, flanked by 2 of the women, their eyes unreadable. Snow clung to the hems of their skirts, the wind tugging loose strands of hair across their faces. "They're accused of stealing from Cardin's spread," the ranch hand continued. "We aim to bring them in." Elias studied the man's face. There was no real belief behind the words, only the satisfaction of power in motion. "A man ought to have proof before he makes accusations," Elias said at last. One of the riders spat into the snow. "Proof is there here?" His eyes slid toward Naeli, lingering too long. When his hand reached to take her arm, Elias stepped forward. "You'll leave my land now," he said, voice flat but carrying. The rider froze, sensing the weight behind the words. Elias's rifle leaned against the fence post, not in his hands but close enough to speak its own language. A tense moment passed before the men turned their horses, muttering as they rode back into the white distance. The sound of hooves faded until only the wind remained. Naeli's gaze met Elias's, a silent exchange passing between them. It was not thanks, she did not offer gratitude easily, but something steadier, a quiet acknowledgment that he had chosen a side. Without a word, she returned to the barn, and the others followed. That evening, Elias found her stacking wood by the side wall. He joined her without speaking, taking the heavier logs. They worked in companionable silence until she set down the last piece. "We did not steal," she said, her voice low. "I know," Elias replied. She studied him for a moment, the lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. "We refused," she added, as if offering the final stone to fill a gap. They wanted us to marry into another band. Men we did not choose. So we were told to leave, or be made to stay. The words carried no self-pity, only the blunt truth of survival. Elias understood. The choice to endure the cold was better than surrendering one's will. He thought of his own self-imposed exile, how it had been his way of refusing a world that had once taken everything from him. 2 days passed in uneasy quiet before trouble came again. It was full dark when the sound of horses shattered the stillness, this time more of them, 7, maybe 8. Elias was already on the porch when the shapes emerged, a cluster of men riding hard, their voices rough in the night air. The lead man dismounted, swaggering up to the steps. "We warned you," he said. "Now we're taking them." Behind Elias, the cabin door opened and Nayeli stepped out. One by one, the other women appeared from the shadows, fanning out beside her. They carried no rifles, only shovels, axes, and the unshaken calm of those who have faced worse. Elias's rifle rested across his arm now, his stance easy but unyielding. The snow thickened, muting sound, making the scene feel suspended in time. No one moved. The riders shifted uneasily, their breath steaming. "You'd best go home," Elias said. It was not a threat, but a statement of fact. The air between them carried a weight heavier than any bullet. The standoff held until the first rider looked away, muttering under his breath. The others followed, turning their horses and vanishing into the falling snow. The sound faded into nothing, leaving only the crackle of ice underfoot and the quiet breathing of those who remained. Inside, the fire's glow softened the room. The women moved easily now, their presence filling the cabin with a hum of quiet talk and the faint sound of laughter. Elias sat by the hearth, listening without looking directly at them, the warmth seeping into him in ways he could not name. The next morning, the world seemed gentler. The storm had passed, leaving the ridge blanketed in new snow that glittered under the pale sun. Nayeli was outside, clearing a patch of earth near the side of the cabin. Elias watched from the porch, curiosity nudging him forward. "Ground still frozen," he said, stepping beside her. "It will thaw," she replied, working the soil with a small hand tool. "Better to start now." He crouched beside her, fingers sinking into the cold dirt. They worked together, the air filled only with the scrape of metal against earth and the distant call of a raven. There was no need for conversation, the act itself was its own kind of language. In that quiet, Elias felt something shift inside him, as if the frost that had held him for 30 winters was loosening its grip. The ridge no longer felt like a place apart from the world, it felt like the center of something worth tending. Days lengthened, and the rhythm of life settled into something steady. The women remained, their presence no longer strange, but as much a part of the ridge as the pines and the snow-fed creek. Elias found himself looking for Nayeli in small moments, the way she tied her hair before work, the faint smile that came when the others teased her in their own tongue. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Elias stood on the porch and looked out over the land. The snow was melting in patches now, revealing the dark earth beneath. Behind him, the cabin door opened, and Nayeli stepped out, standing beside him without a word. The silence was full, not empty. He realized then that solitude had never been the cure for his hurt, it had only kept the wound from healing. These women, with their quiet resilience, had done what 30 winters could not. The light faded and the first stars blinked awake in the vast sky. Elias turned slightly toward Nayeli, not to speak but simply to be near enough to feel her presence. The wind moved gently through the pines, carrying the scent of thawing earth, the promise of something new. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the ridge would never be the same again. And for the first time in decades, he was glad.